Alright, let me get over to somewhere here in Streamlabs so I can see. No. There we go. Okay. I should be live. You are not seeing anything though right now. Dude. Come on. Should be seeing something right now, but you are not. I apologize for that. Hopefully you can hear me. I think you should be able to. I'm a little bit late. I was cleaning my house for a bit. So sure. Oh, why? My screen is not loading. There we go. Okay. Here we go. You guys should now be able to see the screen. If you are not, just put something in the chat and let me know. Just gonna check and see. Okay, yep, we're live on here now. Hello, Camden. Okay, so we have 4 people in here. I got the GFS loaded up here. We'll get the Storm Prediction Center Outlook as well up. I'm gonna just edit a couple things here with the screen capture a little bit here. No. There we go. Okay, so we're just gonna edit a couple things here, just make it so. There we go. So currently today we have a slight risk of severe weather here over the central northern plains. We also have a marginal risk extending from Illinois over into the mid-Atlantic, which is new because that was not here earlier today. Anyway, we have. Oh, I should probably. There we go. So your greatest tornado risk today is over central Nebraska for areas like Grand Island, Kearney, North Platte, and Lexington. Right here, we have a 2% tornado risk surrounding Nebraska. This will include Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Pierre, South Dakota, Hastings, Nebraska, and Fremont, Nebraska. And then we have a 15% hatch tail risk in Nebraska, right where that 5 tor is pretty much. We have another marginal risk from areas near Lincoln, Illinois, back down to the Atlantic coast. Currently, let's pull up satellite right now. Nope, that's the wrong site. I would normally have all this stuff pulled up, but I did just get home and here. So satellite picture right now, we put it on loop. Let's put it on loop here. We have the subtropical jet, or the Baja jet, as Ben Williams likes to say it, is currently encompassing portions of Texas here. You can see that with these upper level clouds moving throughout here. We have a bunch of pop-up thunderstorms starting to form along a large boundary in the eastern United States here, and central, and going into kind of the mid-Atlantic region. And then across portions of Nebraska, we have a pretty powerful trough starting to swing its way eastward. We can see there's a lot of clouds forming on the Rocky Mountains from that trough, and you can see that you have northerly flowing upper level clouds up here with more westernly flowing here, which means you have large scale ascent or lift for thunderstorms this afternoon. Currently, there's no cumulus clouds over the region, so we don't have that instability to have the lift, but we are expecting a severe weather event generally in here later this afternoon, so that will be something to watch. I'm going to see if anybody has any questions right now, because this chat is open and there's a few people watching. Okay, nothing yet. We can see, looking at, I believe, upper level, water vapor will give you a general look at what I literally just pointed out. Okay, yeah, upper level water vapor shows pretty much the same thing. There's actually already a few storms firing up in South Dakota here, which is interesting. We have a few more powerful updrafts forming here in North Carolina, and you can see this upper level pattern, a pretty powerful trough starting to swing in, and then you have that subtropical jet as well moving in from the northwestern portions of Mexico, eastern portions of the Pacific Ocean. So you have a general favorable pattern for severe weather over the southern central plains. Let's go over to 500 millibar here and look at the RAP model. More stuff. First, once I'm done with days, I'll go back and answer questions. So if your question isn't answered right away, I'm sorry. I'm currently here we are. Here's the 15Z RAP. We're going to show it for this afternoon. So this is once it loads here. This is currently what the RAP has. So again, that 500 millibar look, we have the base of a trough right here, which is just another term for a system, a storm system, basically. We have another storm system kind of over the eastern United States here. This is a weaker one, but you can see there's definitely enough lift for there to be thunderstorms over here. You got a lot of large-scale ascent or forcing over this region. And then you can see that Baja jet, subtropical jet, kind of punching in here in Texas, which we saw on satellite. And then we can see the other part of the jet stream kind of punching through here over the northern high plains. So you're going to have that ascent that's going to arrive into the central plains later tonight. We'll go to 1Z here, which is 8 o'clock, and you can see, once it loads, this jet migrates a lot further east. You can see that right here. Now, normally with a look like this, you would be concerned about severe weather for Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Why are we not concerned about severe weather there? Well, I'll dive into it. So we can see our dew points over there are into the 60s, which is not really great. So that's one reason. And if we take a sounding where the dew points are in the 60s, you can see there is no moisture at all. You have a very strong elevated mix layer, which is this area of dry air in the low to mid levels right here from about 900 to about 600 millibars. This is causing there to be really no instability for storms at all. Even though you have the lift, you don't have the unstable air nor the moisture depth to support severe thunderstorms, which can happen on these first couple of days where you have that moisture advection still going northward and the deeper moisture hasn't arrived yet. You can see this wind profile, your hodograph, or basically just your wind shear plotted on a graph, is favorable for severe storms and tornadoes. It's just you do not have any instability or moisture to support that. However, if we look in Nebraska here, ahead of the storms that fire on the RAP, right here, you have that instability profile. Yes, it's a bit dry at the surface, 55 over 84. I think it's going to be a little bit more dew point than that, but you have the instability profile here to support that between these red and white dotted lines. The parcel line is basically your line of where your storm parcel is going to be lifted up. You can see your low-level cloud base is going to be at around 2,000 meters, which is pretty high. But overall, this is a favorable profile for thunderstorms and severe thunderstorms. You have moderate instability right here. Really, this is a pretty good hail sounding, but I'll dive into that in a minute here. You have steep lapse rates, which is demonstrated by your temperature profile cooling with height. So you can see the more to the left it goes, the steeper the lapse rates are. So from 0 to 3 kilometer, your lapse rates are very steep. They're still steep above that, just not as steep as they were in the lower levels there. And this leads to moderate instability with mixed layer CAPE of 2,000 joules per kilogram, which that is a measure of the instability in the atmosphere or storm fuel. Your hodograph here, this would be favorable for severe storms, maybe a little bit more shorter lived storms because it's pretty small, but pretty interesting stuff here that we can kind of dive into on the RAP. We'll look at the HRRR right now, and this is going to help depict where storms may form later this afternoon, and we'll dive into it a little further to the east as well. We'll go to the forecast loop. So here we are. Looks like the HRRR has storms forming around 20Z or 3 p.m. this afternoon in Nebraska and South Dakota. If we take a sounding in front of these storms, once it loads here, you can see, again, we have that moderate instability as we have a little bit of an elevated mixed layer at around 600 millibars that is mixed out completely. Probably took a lot to get to that point, but you have pretty strong dew point depressions, 26 degrees between the dew point and the temperature. So wind and hail would be your main threat here. Could see some pretty strong wind gusts and could see some decently large hailstones. Your overall deep layer wind shear, or 6 kilometer wind shear, is 30 knots, which is generally a cutoff point for more intense storms. You have the instability, though, to support to support maybe a significant severe storm or two. You can see these storms kind of start to move northward, and the HRRR depicts a pretty intense updraft there in South Dakota, moving generally straight north. In that situation, maybe you could see a brief tornado threat. This is a little bit contaminated from the storm right there, but you have a lot more backing of the winds in the low levels, which is leading to effective SRH of 100, which is basically another measurement of the low level wind shear. Your hodograph would support maybe a tornado or two as well. The biggest tornado threat, though, is going to be after dark in Nebraska. You probably will get a few intense storms to form. You can see them starting to form in the HRRR right here, and then on the southern flank of the line as well. These storms are going to enter pretty deep moisture, and we'll talk about that right now. You can see moisture gets transported northward, and why that is, and we'll switch to a southern sector, why the moisture gets transported northward is a thing called warm air advection. You can see there's moisture that's getting transported from Missouri, and that's more deeper moisture, so you're going to have potential for tornadoes overnight. Looking at 850 millibar, you can see that transport happening in real time once I show you. So you have that transport happening because you have 30, 40 knot low level jet that starts to form in Nebraska here, and you're able to transport some of this deeper moisture from Texas all the way through here. So that's why you're starting to get that severe threat. At 700 millibar, you can see there's going to be storms that are going to fire because you have a pretty strong shortwave here, which is depicted by these squiggly lines here in the plot. And that's going to provide your forcing for lift for storms to form over Nebraska this evening. We'll look at a sounding profile and kind of break it down here. But initially, these storms may be more hail dominant. We'll show a profile right here. Yeah, this is not very good. We'll look at this. We'll look at the profiles right here though, in central Nebraska. So we can see we have a little bit more low-level shear than you did earlier in the day. Oops, did not need to project that out. But your thermodynamics are still pretty similar. As we get a little bit deeper into the night, let's see here. This is 10. No, that's 11 o'clock. This is 11 o'clock here. And we start to see that these storms may enter a little bit more favorable instability profile. You have 2,500 mixed layer CAPE that's right there sitting here. And here's a sounding profile. You can see that low level wind shear is a lot stronger. You have a lot of streamwiseness in your low level hodograph, which is basically how much curvature you have. You have a lot. You can see, you can measure that by kind of plotting something like that. You have a ton right there in the low levels. That's going to really help out any sustained supercell that forms either within the line or near the line. One problem with this profile is you start to see a little bit of a surface inversion form in the low levels. You can see that by the temperature kind of pushing out the parcel gradient. It's also really dry in the mid levels. This will cause storms to be really photogenic, but maybe decrease your tornado risk some. You still do have low level instability with 3 CAPE of 120 joules per kilogram. So that'll be something to watch here. So this is a favorable profile for a couple tornadoes overnight, and that's why the Storm Prediction Center introduced a 5% tornado risk over Nebraska overnight. And we can see those storms generally move into a line and move eastward throughout the day. Further to the east, we'll kind of talk about what's going to happen over that portion of the United States. We'll also look at the radar right now because there's probably storms popping up there on radar. Yep, there are. We can kind of zoom into this radar here. And so right now we have storms popping up in North Carolina and Virginia, and also up into Ohio. Here is a measure of your instability, your storm fuel. So you have a decent amount of storm fuel here in North Carolina and Virginia. 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE is going to be enough to support severe storms, pending your wind shear profiles. Here we are. This is for 2 p.m. It's currently 12. HRRR is a little behind on forming these storms, but you can see if a little bit of a warm nose or more warmer air aloft, which is really decreasing your lapse rate profile, only 6 Celsius per kilometer. You do have a skinny instability profile, which won't support the strongest storms ever, but you have 1,000 mixed layer CAPE despite that, so you have storm fuel. You have a hodograph that would support marginally severe storms with 30 knots of 6 kilometer wind shear or mid-level wind shear, so you have enough to support isolated and weakly organized severe storms over the Virginia, North Carolina area up through Illinois this afternoon. HRRR doesn't form any storms in Illinois, but there's probably a similar environment up there to what's in Virginia. Yeah. This would mainly be favorable for wind and hail, more wind oriented in Illinois there. Maybe we get a land spout tornado like we did yesterday. We'll talk about that in a little bit though. Or maybe not. I don't know. That's it for day one. If people have questions, send them in. I'll happily answer them. We'll move on to the day two outlook from the Storm Prediction Center. They will be doing an update soon, and I will talk about that update once it comes out. But currently, we have a slight risk from southeast Missouri up to near Duluth, Minnesota, stretching across most of Michigan, the southern mitten there, including Marquette, Michigan as well. And then we have it going into Indianapolis and western Ohio as well. And then it also includes Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have a large enhanced risk from Fort Wayne, Michigan, near Fort Wayne, Indiana, not Michigan, up into eastern Minnesota, west, much of Wisconsin. You can see the Storm Prediction Center has a large 5% tornado risk, including western Ohio, all of Indiana, east central Illinois, down to southern Illinois, southeast Missouri, much of Wisconsin, eastern Minnesota. I think the main risk is going to be, the more main and widespread risk is going to be hail, though. The large hatch hail region, which means 2+ inch hail will be possible in areas in that black hatching. So Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky. If there is a storm down here that forms, you could see some very large hail with it. Indiana, eastern Illinois there, up into Chicago, Indiana, western Michigan, much of Wisconsin, and eastern Minnesota. And then also the chance for some damaging wind gusts as well. Currently no hatched area exists, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a 75 mph plus gust or two from like central Wisconsin down through here. There's wind profile, or the atmospheric profiles do support potential for a very strong wind gust or two, generally in that region. In their discussion, they mention a significant tornado risk over portions of Illinois, Indiana, southern lower Michigan, and southeast Wisconsin. And this is conditional, and we'll talk about why it's conditional in a little bit here. But we'll look now at some of the models and what they have. First, we'll kind of look at HREF guidance, and basically what the HREF is it is a composite of all the convective allowing models, or the short range models that forecasters, meteorologists, storm chasers use, and this is pulled up right here. So we can see, here's what it has for today. We'll talk about that first. And we're using its contour of the updraft tracks. We're going to remove the FE3 because it's overzealous with the updraft tracks. But you can see today there's severe storms expected from southern North Dakota down into Nebraska. The highest risk of severe storms is over, the highest concentration is over Nebraska and South Dakota. I think this might go enhanced at some point, or maybe should, for wind and or hail. Kind of generally in central South Dakota, northwest Iowa, into Nebraska. And then we also have an isolated convective signal from Illinois over into the mid-Atlantic. This would be more wind and hail oriented over here. We'll talk about that. And then tomorrow, the convective signal for tomorrow is generally strongest in two zones. One over eastern Illinois, down into southeast Missouri and northern Kentucky there, or northern Tennessee into eastern Kentucky in here. And then we have another zone of higher concentration from Minnesota back in here, down through northern Illinois, over into western Ohio, northern Ohio, and into much of Michigan and much of Wisconsin. We'll look now at kind of the specifics with what the HREF guidance shows. Is there an upper Midwest sector? I wish there was. I think Northern Plains maybe would work. Not really. Sucks. Northeast? Okay, that's going to work. So here is something I'm going to look at. This is the SDP, or the significant tornado parameter. It's basically a parameter that combines a few ingredients and spits out something. It's not the best, but it'll give you an idea. And we're going to overlay it with updraft helicity tracks, which is basically how strong the updrafts could be. So here we are for tomorrow. Generally, we're maxing out the tornado risk, at least in the early afternoon, in eastern Minnesota, down into portions of Wisconsin over here. And then overnight is where we could see a significant tornado risk ramp up over maybe eastern Illinois, down over into central Indiana over here and up through southwestern Michigan. So we kind of have two zones of tornado potential that could be a little bit more high end. I think this risk over here, it's more conditional, and we'll talk about why in a second, but it's more conditional, but it could be more higher impact if we get storms to form, which is one of the reasons why it's a little bit less, um, why it's a little bit less unknown what's going to happen with that. We'll talk about that now, though. We'll look at the HRRR first, and I'll look at some other models, and I'll kind of show you what we have. We'll dive into the trough first, which we can use the wrap for. So here's a look at 500 millibar. Once it loads. So we can see that this trough that ejects over the Central Plains ejects into the Midwest tomorrow. Kind of shears out a little bit, excuse me. And the low closes in the low level. So technically you would have a cold core tornado event potentially tomorrow over portions of Minnesota here near the low. Looking at the flow aloft, you have the Baja Jet that kind of comes in here, which is going to help initiate potentially some storms over South Illinois, Eastern Missouri, this kind of region here, which I highlighted. And then we have the parent jet system, which is over here. Now, what the Baja Jet's also going to provide is it's going to provide a way for a lot of dry air to sneak in between the main upper level trough and the Baja Jet, because it's going to be forced to have a lot more dry air or an EML to kind of come in here into portions of the Midwest, which is going to be a potential fail mode for tomorrow. We'll talk about that in a couple soundings here soon. But you have that upper level low here, and you have a lot of upper level divergence aloft over kind of the Wisconsin area, which is why you're going to see widespread storm development probably over this general region tomorrow, maybe into northern Illinois there, because you have the synoptics to support that. Now, as we get into the overnight hours, those synoptics do translate into kind of northern Indiana and southwest Michigan, maybe extreme northeast Illinois. So there, maybe you could see a highlighted risk for severe storms. Here is the HRRR's take on tomorrow. This is the 12Z run, so we'll see here. We have storms that come from Nebraska the previous day that kind of move into Minnesota. And we see storms that kind of start to develop toward lunchtime, 12 p.m. in Minnesota here. And if we take a forecast sounding in front of these storms in south central Minnesota, we can see that there's a favorable environment for tornadoes. Your level hodograph is very curved, which leads to storm relativity of 140 meters per second squared, which is pretty good. A lot of instability, 3,000 joules per kilogram of ML Cape, which we can see here with this very steeply very steep lapse rate profile. And that leads you to a lot of low-level instability, which is favorable for tornado events, and you might see some quick tornadoes up here with any storms that develop. That risk kind of moves into Wisconsin, and we'll generally see storms start to kind of fire down this dry line / cold front. Here, western Wisconsin, mid-afternoon, we can see that the low levels get a lot more mixed out, which I'm not sure it's going to get mixed to this degree, but we probably will have higher dew point spreads, which is why significant wind gusts would be possible. You would have higher downdraft cape, and you would have a lot more dry air in the low levels, low level RH of 61%, which is going to lead to stronger downdrafts once storms are kind of more in a line. We can see the HRRR has a tail in Charlie that develops here in south central Wisconsin. The environment in front of this tail in Charlie, we'll kind of dive into it right now. I took a box sounding of it. You have a pretty good low level hodograph for supercells. Your low level thermodynamics, however, aren't there for tornadoes per se. You have a really high temperature dew point spread. Now, this is the HRRR, and it does have a bias to overmixing, so we might see those dew points in the upper 60s instead of the mid 60s and temperatures in the mid 80s. We can see that storm goes pretty crazy there and starts to gain an updraft track and turn right. If we do have storms in the southern, if it'll load. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here we are, finally loaded. So why storms would be more tornadic if they move to the right is because your main hodograph is steering everything kind of eastward. So if you have storms that move northeast, you won't inject all of this low-level wind profile. Instead, you'd get a piece of it, and they'd be moving with the left mover vector, which would mainly be a hail threat. The right moving vector would be more like northeast at 25-ish. So the more northern moving your storms tomorrow are, the less likely they're producing tornadoes unless they're in a line. Now we can see toward sunset here, we have this dry line over kind of portions of Illinois and Indiana here, and we'll kind of observe it in the surface here. We have the cold front, which is generally back in here, more or less. Um, and we have a pretty sharp dry line kind of acquire itself over the Illinois region tomorrow. I don't know why everything is taking a long time to load right now. Maybe it's just because of this one issue right here. Okay. Don't know what's happening right now. I'll just get Task Manager up here and close out Discord and see if that'll do it. Close out Spotify. It's being stupid. Is my internet working? It should be. Okay, is this just the tab that's not working? Okay, it was just the tab. Anyway, we have that dry line at the surface here. Ahead of the dry line, there's extreme instability. We'll take a forecast setting right here in east central Illinois into western Indiana. You can see this would be a very favorable profile for tornadic supercells. You have a lot of low level shear. That hodograph starts to take a little turn there. A ton of instability, steep lapse rates. Now, one problem is that since the HRRR is overmixing, I'm going to bet you that this EML is probably going to be a little bit stronger. It may jut out like this, and the EML again is the elevated mix layer, or that dry air at 700 millibar, and it may jut out more like that, which could prohibit storms from forming. Another thing to watch is the dry line orientation. You want probably more of a north-south oriented dry line. The dry line being more oriented southwest to northeast is probably going to cause storms to detrain and not really form as much. Now, one thing we are watching is a surface trough, which is where the winds start to back a little bit more in the low levels here, and the HRRR has formed storms along this the past couple of runs that start to get kind of intense later in the evening. You can see that one right there. It forms along the surface trough, and here's a look at that. This is a profile here in southwest Michigan. You still have a ton of instability. You have a little bit of a low level cap, but this storm could easily break through that and tap into that very unstable air at really 1 kilometer and higher. This hodograph here is extremely elongated and very curved, which will favor strong tornadoes if you do get a storm to fire over there. So that's something to watch very closely. You can see the HRRR also tries to fire some storms down here in Indiana and western Illinois. I do think the hail threat is probably going to be greater if storms fire in here tomorrow. I think the hail threat would be higher with those storms than really anything else. You can see the HRRR has that storm persist for a long time, which would mean it's a pretty intense updraft. And since you have, again, warm air advection, which I mentioned with the previous day, you have the warm air coming in with the moisture getting pumped. So you're not going to have too much problems with storms if they can persist after dark. You can see that moisture is getting pumped from the southwest here, which you're getting 70s dew points into Michigan in May, which is pretty rare. And the thermodynamic space overall with this event is really rare. Now, why is that? Well, you have 4,000 joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE, which is a ton of energy. Usually you only get this in the summertime. Looking at your dew points, you have dew points well into the low 70s, upper 60s. Like, the thermodynamic profile is really rare for the time of the year. And that's due in part to a very strong EML you have. 8 Celsius per kilometer lapse rates. And if we take a box sounding here, kind of in that, you can see this EML really kind of be pronounced here with a lot of dry air at 700 millibars, which is definitely a fail mode for storms that try to fire further south. You have a lot more drier air down there, and the forcing is more minimal. So it's a conditional risk as you get south of I-80, I think, is where the conditional risk would be for storms tomorrow. We'll take a look at the NAM 3 kilometer for tomorrow as well. The NAM 3 kilometer has been really weird. It's had a lot more. It's had a lot more going for. It's had a lot more storms going than a lot of other miles. Is what I'm trying to say here. You can see it really fires a ton of storms off tomorrow afternoon. around 3 p.m. in northern Illinois. And why is that? Well, it has the dry line a lot oriented better, and it also has deeper moisture profiles. If you take a sounding in front of these storms, you can see there's dew points in the 70s in northern Illinois. You do have that EML, which is not particularly mixed out too great, but it's enough to where you would get storms to fire. And we'll look at the surface setup here at 19Z, which is 2 p.m. And you can see the dew point map right here. Your dry line is all the way out in western Illinois, and you have really deep moisture pretty much everywhere. And I think this is probably overdone by a good bit. I'm not sure you're going to get moisture like this. So you have storms that kind of fire along a surface trough here in central northern Illinois, and they kind of move eastward. And you can see there's a lot of divergence aloft in that area, large scale ascent. So you would get storms in generally this area with a solution like the NAM 3 kilometer. And they probably would be intense. You can see these storms kind of move into the Chicago region around 21Z or 3 p.m. And the environment would be favorable for large hail and damaging winds, maybe a tornado or two if we can get the storms to turn right some. But you can see there's a lot of fuel that the dam has over kind of a large area. And you can see it even tries to fire storms further south along the dry line, although they might detrain because of the dry line orientation like I previously mentioned, but it does do that. And then it also has more storms firing up in Wisconsin as well. So all in all, it has a pretty impressive storm day for that day with a lot of updraft helicity tracks from southern Michigan up through Wisconsin there. I don't think this is very realistic, and I think this is kind of the high-end solution for tomorrow. I really don't see this happening. Here's a look at what the NSSL has. This is another convective allowing model that we have our hands on for tomorrow. You can see it looks pretty similar to the HRRR. It fires storms in Wisconsin in the afternoon hours, and they kind of move northeastward. It does try to fire in Illinois, but again, they kind of detrain off that surface trough slash dry line. And by detraining, I mean they get so much dry air here because of how dry the profile is, because of that EML, that they can't get going. They don't have the moisture in the mid-levels to actually accelerate and move past the LFC or LCL, so they can't get that higher instability profile that exists above 3 kilometers. Storms further in Wisconsin don't have that issue because the EML is a bit lighter up there, and you can see it's a lot more mixed out. You have a good low level hodograph to support a tornado risk up there, and you can see there's still a lot of dry air, so that's not going to be an issue because you have the deeper surface moisture there, but you still have a lot of dry air, which is going to favor supercells and favor on all hazard severe risk. You can see this run does fire a storm kind of in southern Illinois in the later afternoon hours at 7 p.m. And we can see there's a pretty strong capping inversion with that storm, so it probably would be elevated above that, and I believe it's moving with the left vector. So that would be an elevated supercell producing some pretty big hail. Generally, my thoughts on tomorrow is if you live kind of south of here, generally, I think your tornado risk is relatively low, at least in Illinois. I think the greatest tornado risk tomorrow is probably going to be somewhere in Wisconsin back through Minnesota. Not exactly like here, but something like that. And then you might have a secondary zone over southwest Michigan, maybe Chicago. I don't know. You probably get the lake breeze, so it'd probably be generally more focused in here in areas eastward with that secondary tornado risk. Let's see. It's another model's take on tomorrow. This is the ARW. It has a pretty intense storm that fires along that kind of cold core area in Minnesota tomorrow. Yeah, very similar environment to the HRRR, favorable for a tornado risk over there. You can see it tries to fire along the dry line further to the south, but again, you get that detrainment. And we can see Michigan gets involved with a line of storms that evening, so that's definitely something to watch. Now, let's move into Friday. I don't think the day 2 is updated yet, I believe. So, yep, nope, it hasn't. So let's move into Friday. The Storm Prediction Center for Friday, once it loads here, they have a large slight risk from Little Rock all the way over to southwestern Ohio. I do think this might get expanded northward, and we'll probably see an enhanced risk with this at some point. We'll talk about why in a little bit here. Maybe here would where that higher risk zone be. All severe hazards are going to be possible on Friday. And we can see here that the wrap is starting to get into the range for Friday. Friday is a day where we have a little wave at 500 right here. But your main wave is with this closed low up here in the Minnesota region. And then you also have influence on the subtropical jet, which is helping the event out. So you have a large area of broad zonal flow. And zonal flow is more west to east upper level flow, what we call it. So this is going to give you a lot of shortwave troughs, which we can see at 700 millibar here. There's a shortwave here, there's one here, there's another one here, there's another one here. So there's going to be widespread storms on Friday afternoon. We have a large warm sector which takes shape and advects northward. Now, some of this is going to be kind of uncertain because of the impacts of the morning convection on Friday morning from Thursday storms, so we don't really know where the northern extent of this threat lies. But I think anywhere really south of I-70 is probably where you're going to have your greatest severe risk. North of I-70 is a big question mark right now, especially in Illinois and Indiana. We'll see if that moisture can get advected up there. But you can see very deep moisture profiles exist in the afternoon hours. If you look in the upper level wind shear, you can see you have a really powerful upper level jet with strong flow really across the whole warm sector, which is going to provide a severe risk. If you look at the changes in height falls, you have pretty strong height falls from really Arkansas, Missouri, through the whole Ohio Valley. So you're going to get storms, and probably discrete storms that maybe go into a line segment later on. Here's the NAM 3 kilometers take on the event. We'll look at that right now. First, I have to get through, put it over here. So it doesn't really have too much morning convection that flares up. It has a couple zones of storms that form. One in Missouri at 12 o'clock, and then we have another zone kind of in Kentucky here. So we'll kind of watch these, and they move eastward, and you get storms to really erupt over Illinois in the afternoon hours. So this would be a very significant solution for portions of Illinois, and in Indiana and Kentucky. Let's see forecast profile here, just northeast of St. Louis, and that's a little contaminated. But you have a very favorable risk for strong tornadoes because of the low-level curvature in your hodograph here, and you have a lot of instability above an EML at 700 to 800 millibars. And again, that's the dry air that comes from the southern central plains, the drought-stricken areas. And this is leading to very sharp temperature changes aloft, which is measured again in our lapse rates at 7 to 8 Celsius per kilometer. What's up, Veer? How we doing? And really, this is a very favorable environment for a tornado outbreak, frankly, but this is only in the NAM, and the NAM can be a little bit overzealous with things sometimes. Now, if we move over to the GFS, the GFS has had a similar solution for days as well, along with the NAM. It has a really prolific event kind of happening over Illinois, Indiana, eastern Missouri, generally in here. It's a little bit fast with its evolution, so I do think the placement the NAM has is probably more closer to being correct, but okay, that's really contaminated. Here's a profile in western Indiana. The GFS does have a bias where it doesn't back the winds as much, so we'll have to see if that happens. But we have enough curvature for really a prolific, not prolific, probably more of a hail threat with this one, but you still have a lot of instability. So I think overall, I think the more widespread risk with Thursday or Friday is going to be hail and wind over a really large area. I think you're probably going to have a localized significant tornado corridor that does set up somewhere on Friday as well. Oh, that's the 12Z run. I wanted to look at the 6Z run, not the 12Z run pivotal. Come on. But generally, I do think confidence is increasing that the warm sector is going to be further north on Friday. The Euro has it at I-70 at this point. It has convection that already forms in Tennessee. We have a lot of short waves at 500, which is going to help. The mid-levels are just going to help initiate your storms. And again, you have a good amount of height falls across the region, which is that pressure falling. So you're going to get storms because of that as well. We'll see the atmospheric conditions kind of on a more widespread level on the NAM. So the NAM has a little cold pool here because of storms that form. You have really strong instability throughout the whole profile down further south. You have a little southwest to northeast oriented dry line over there. I'm not sure if that would initiate. And looks like you have a lot of widespread instability. Here's a look at the wind shear at 0 to 3 kilometer. You have a lot of wind shear across areas as well. This is the energy helicity index, which is going to combine some ingredients, a couple, and kind of show you where the more highlighted zones are for for tornadoes potentially, or just intense thunderstorms in general. And there's a large area of that from central Illinois, um, eastern Missouri through a large portion of the Appalachian Mountains. Towards 0Z, we can see, or 7 p.m., we can see this risk kind of move eastward. So we'll kind of see what happens with that. FV3 is probably going to have, yeah, it's going to have storms everywhere. This is a model that is not to be trusted too much when it comes to the evolution of storms, but it fires storms at 1 p.m. in eastern Missouri, western Illinois, and if this model were to be trusted, you would have a pretty prolific event with that as well. A lot of hail, a lot of wind there. Maybe a tornado risk starting to increase toward 3 p.m. as we start to see low level wind shear values increase. But generally, that's a really strong convective signal on the FE3, although its convective signal is always really strong, so not something we'll take the note here. RRFS as well has a very similar picture. It has storms pretty much everywhere forming, and it seems like the general consensus is that we start to see storms at 1 p.m. on Friday. Why 1 p.m.? Well, 1 p.m. we start to see a pretty powerful shortwave come into Missouri here, which would generally um, kick off storms. If we look at our instability profile here, which I'll look at ahead of the storms in St. Louis, if you look at your instability profile, you can see, ooh, that's probably not a great representation of what I should look at. Let's go a little further south. Okay, yeah, moisture didn't make it to St. Louis yet. Further south, you can see that this EML is completely mixed out by this point, and you have an explosive Cape profile, which would support really intense thunderstorm development over the region. Um, so overall, and you have the wind shear, so overall you have a potent environment for severe storms. If anybody has questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer them. If you like what you're seeing here as well, just subscribe and like. Helps me out, helps other people out to get this pushed into their algorithms. We only have one like on the stream so far, I believe, and we've been streaming. Oh, we have four. We've been streaming for 44 minutes, so we've had some people come in here. So I just want to let you know if other people want to know what's happening. This will help them out. But basically, this model shows storms really everywhere from West Virginia over to Missouri. This is another model similar to the FE3 where it over convects a lot. So, but overall, having a convective signal like this, oh my gosh, that's really 380. Are you serious? That's hilarious. It's like weedy fuel right there. But models are really agreeing on an intense severe risk from St. Louis into kind of the Cincinnati region. So I think the Storm Prediction Center is going to push their slight further north and their enhanced further north as well, because that's a really impressive signal there. We'll look at the NAM as well for Friday. NAM has a massive cold pool, it seems, but it also is similar timing to really all the other models. NAM has the warm front reaching all the way up to Peoria, Illinois, up here. And then we have that dry line type feature in here. Maybe cold front, I don't know. Pacific cold front, I guess. You have really deep moisture pretty much everywhere. You would have a tornado risk pretty much in a lot of spots if this were to be correct. This is a forecast sounding just south of that warm front there with those storms. Pretty deep moisture profile here. Curved photograph, but a lot of veer back veer, but that's typical for the NAM to show that. So you would have a tornado risk with that, but your greater tornado risk would be probably in eastern Illinois ahead of those storms here. Yeah, you have a lot more wind shear over there. Instability is higher, you have more moisture. Take a little area average sounding in front of those storms. You can see a lot of low level moisture, a lot of that upper level and middle level instability. You have a large EML, not a large, a pretty small EML there at 700 millibars, which could help storms be a little bit less messy. Although I do think storms will probably be pretty messy on this day. A well-vented photograph or plot of your winds. So a lot of upper-level wind shear as well as low-level wind shear and just speed shear in general. And you can see that as the profile goes up, you can see those wind barbs get stronger and stronger and stronger. We have 85 knots at like 14 kilometers, and then at like 9 kilometers you have 95. That's really impressive right there. Um, and overall, your profile is really supportive for all significant severe hazards: tornadoes, wind, and hail. Currently, the greatest severe risk, it seems like, is going to be generally in here, maybe points a little bit further to the east. We'll have to watch that. So that's about all I have for Friday right now. If people have questions on that, just let me know. I have my Twitter tab open to see when the newest outlook comes out for the Storm Prediction Center. Oh, here's something I could show you. Pull this in here. This is though what the Storm Prediction Center expects for today. Um, Scattered damaging wind gusts, a couple tornadoes, scattered large hail reports, some 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and you can see they highlighted this area in Nebraska as the greatest corridor for that large hail risk, which is where they have their SIG corridor, or contour, I should say. So that's something interesting to kind of watch. You have all your cities in the risk there. So just thought I'd put that up here because we talked about that severe risk earlier. Let's see here. Any storms firing in the northern plains right now? Do we have some thunderstorm? Oh, we do have thunderstorms starting to northern plains. Let's go to a different sector, if I can. Please allow me to. Like, come on, dude. Come on. Yeah, it looks like we do have storms forming in the northern plains, though. They're moving generally northwestward right now, so maybe a hail threat with those as they move off into South Dakota. Waiting for that day 2 outlook update, and then we'll kind of talk about that. But let's talk about next through Tuesday, probably. Okay, so here we are. So here we are for next week. We can see that this model's loaded pretty far out at this point. So we can see that here's our first trough that kind of moves in. Saturday we could have a severe weather event over the Red River Valley. We have the main parent trough over here, but you have the subtropical or Baja jet that kind of supplies a pretty strong shortwave that is over the Oklahoma and Texas region along the Red River Valley. Sunday, depending upon when this wave kind of moves in here, we have a really large system that kind of moves in, and there's sporadic short waves along it. You can see one's kind of right there. Depending upon where the dry line is situated, if it's situated further west, I think you're going to have a greater chance of storms initiating, but if it's further to the east, then no. Currently, the GEFS has a dry line along the Oklahoma-Texas border up into Nebraska, like down here. Vectors off it are pretty good, so maybe you get some storms to fire in here, and then maybe another zone up here. And then gap kind of Kansas and parts of Kansas and Oklahoma. The next day I will be out chasing, which is Monday. We can see that very strong system moves in with a really large area of upper level wind flow. And first, before I talk about that, here's what the Storm Prediction Center has out for those days. Totally forgot to go over that. Sunday they have a small 15 from southern Kansas to northern Texas. Interesting. And then for the next day, I do think this will get expanded pretty substantially here pretty soon. I think they're going to put it more north. They have it from the Nebraska-Kansas border down into the Texas-Oklahoma border. So both days are going to, Sunday will include places like Wichita Falls, Texas, Norman, Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, Fort Still, Oklahoma, Edmond, Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma, Wichita Falls, Texas. Monday, right now the Storm Prediction Center has Oklahoma City, Wichita Falls, Wichita, Kansas, Norman, Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma, up into like northern Kansas up there. I'm not really sure if any towns, maybe Great Bend is in it. I don't know. Anyway, you're gonna have a really large dry line on Monday that spans from like South Dakota all the way down into Texas and Oklahoma. There's going to be a lot of storms that form, probably along this dry line because you have that trough access like right here, so you're going to get forcing for those storms. One thing that might be a little bit worrisome for like portions of Oklahoma and Texas is the way the trough is oriented, which might bring in some really dry air in the mid levels. We'll have to see how that evolves. Anyway, not your max. Crap. Why is this like all bugged out like that? I've never seen that before, dog. What? Sorry, I had to reload my page. It was like really bugged out. Okay, here we go. It's not bugged out anymore. It's like what, 132? Okay, so the GEFS has the greatest supercell composite, basically just a parameter, just basically a parameter that uses a lot of other ingredients to kind of spit out an area. It has it from like Nebraska down into Oklahoma with the max over kind of Oklahoma there, which makes sense. Um, Generally speaking, here we'll look at what else? We look at 850 millibars. One thing that kind of does worry me a little bit about Oklahoma is you have a lot of really warm air loft that kind of starts to impinge in on that area. Maybe you don't get storms because of how warm that area is, but maybe you do. It kind of depends. Nebraska and northern Kansas, I think, is practically guaranteed for storms this day because of how close you are to the parent upper level low. You also are closer to the low pressure, and I think your vectors off the dry line are good. And also, I think you won't have issues with an EML over there. The next day, we'll generally move into Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, Arkansas. The current mean composite has anywhere from Iowa down into Oklahoma being a play for severe storms. This is probably going to be a little bit further to the west because the GEFS does have a little bit of a fast bias, and we'll show you the year in a little bit here. But I do think that's going to be further to the west for Tuesday. And then after this, we start to see some mesoscale events over Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas kind of flare up. And so that'll be fun for the last half of my chasecation. Looks like you'll still have storms over that region and moisture. Has the day 2 came out yet? Okay, so there is a new day 2 convective outlook out. So we're going to look at that real quick before we dive into like the Euro has on pivotal weather. And then we'll kind of close out the stream. And if you guys have questions, again, just let me know and I can answer them if it's about any day. Here we are. So we have a 10 hatch tornado risk from eastern Minnesota into southeastern Wisconsin. This is very similar to what I did in my personal outlook last night with a couple friends. We have a giant 5% tornado risk from southeast Missouri up north. Looking at your hail probability, still a giant hail risk, giant significant hail risk really, from Kentucky up into Minnesota and Wisconsin. For wind, still the same wind probabilities. Let's read the discussion. They are expecting large to very large hail, tornadoes, a couple which could be strong, and scattered wind damage. Still mentioning, they did mention potential for a significant core storm mode and transitioning into a linear segment, so that's why they haven't sigged the wind risk yet. Or made it so 75 plus winds would be possible in that area. Looks like here's the that wouldn't be Ohio, that'd be that wouldn't be northern Indiana, that'd be Michigan and Wisconsin. Coverage is more uncertain here. So this is for Illinois, Indiana, and the Ohio, Pennsylvania area. Storm coverage will be more uncertain here. Nevertheless, isolated to widely scattered storms are expected to develop during the afternoon, and a strongly unstable atmosphere, which will have a moderately sheared environment, which will be capable of supercells producing large hail, a couple tornadoes, and wind gusts. Additional activity is possible or is expected overnight due to the warm air advection regime over Ohio. So that's their updated outlook. Okay, let's look into what the Euro has, the actual model here. The Euro's loading right now. Oh, it's actually out. Okay, we can look at the Euro. The newest Euro is loading. So here we go for Friday. It looks like Friday might be a little further north this run based off what it has the height falls. That would be correct. Okay, anyway. Here we are for Saturday. We'll look at the Euro for Saturday here. Saturday it has a bunch of storms forming along the Red River and into Kansas there. Um, we can see there's a lot of deep moisture along this dry line in Oklahoma, in Kansas, or Oklahoma and Texas there that forms. Not not deep, a lot of deep moisture at the surface, but in the mid levels you have a lot of dry air, so you have pretty big capping inversion that forms. However, where the storms do fire, we'll go back to 3 p.m. before the environment gets washed out. Okay, so you have storms that really form in a large area there, and you can see that your environment is favorable for storms to form off that dry line in northern central Texas, as your low level thermodynamics are supportive for storms. You have pretty good orthogonal vectors, which would support supercells off the dry line. Looking at your 500 millibar wave, you can see once it loads here, we have a pretty general region. Has your general parent wave kind of right over here. This looks like just-in-time forcing for areas from Kansas up to Texas, with Texas having probably the greatest chance of initiating because of the subtropical jet, maybe into southern Oklahoma. So this would be the area I'm watching for storm Sunday, along with the secondary area of Colorado into Kansas. I'll go to yellow for that one. Secondary area of Colorado into Kansas there. I'm not really too sure about Oklahoma initiating on Sunday, like central Oklahoma. It's going to be really conditional on when that wave kind of impacts that area. Looking at the upper levels of the atmosphere here, once this loads, you can see that 300 millibar supports that idea that I have of maybe a split area of storms. Maybe you get some that actually do fire in Oklahoma, but I think it's going to be pretty conditional on the dry line dynamics, which we don't really know this far out. The Euro doesn't even have storms firing anywhere, which is interesting. Maybe it has some firing overnight. No, it doesn't. I would think with an 989 millibar low over portions of Colorado that you're going to get a storm to fire over there, in my opinion. Look at moisture and see. Yeah, you're going to get a storm that's going to fire in like northeast Colorado. And typically, moisture in the mid 50s to lower 50s up there is enough to get tornadoes. Now, you do have this little pesky surface inversion right here, but I think you're going to probably see a tornado threat in Colorado and northwest Kansas on Sunday. Oklahoma, it seems like your dry line doesn't really meet the moisture very well. You have like a double dry line feature, which probably doesn't do this event very good. Yeah, you're really dry, so you're probably going to dry air and train if anything if it tries to form. Western Kansas, however, I don't think that's the case. You have a little bit of a surface inversion there at 700 and a decent amount of dry air, but if you get something to go, it's going to be pretty big. The next day, Monday, we have that dry line, which is really is oriented. Ooh, that's a really weak low. But you have your low pressure kind of sitting in Nebraska with a dry line, generally like that. So it looks like your greatest severe threat's probably going to be in like Nebraska and Kansas this day, along that little boundary meetup area. Looking at reflectivity, we have storms that kind of fire widely scattered from like southern Oklahoma, which doesn't look terrible down there, but you're going to be a little bit removed from the upper level dynamics. Yeah, really more of a hail threat, it seems like, if the Euro was correct with that. Looks like the greatest tornado risk would be in like Nebraska, right along the triple point. We take a forecast sounding here. Yeah, you have a lot of instability there, a little bit of an EML, but you have a lot of instability above that. Good clockwise shear. So you're probably going to have a pretty large widespread hail threat this day. Also looking at northern Kansas as well as a potential area. Yeah, northern Kansas doesn't look bad either for tornadoes. Let's see what the Euro has for Tuesday. For Tuesday, Euro has an event. Wow, that's really far southwest. Whoa, what the heck? Guess the Euro has an event over Oklahoma for Tuesday. 70s dew points along the dry line there. And that would be that would be a really favorable look. Yeah, that would be a favorable look. This is 18Z or 1 p.m., so you're going to get storms to go early in a really extreme Cape environment with a really powerful low from Kansas up into Oklahoma. This is making me go crazy. Sorry, guys, because I'm going to be out chasing this. But yeah, that would be a pretty big day if that would actually happen. Looking at the synoptics, we'll kind of look at that. We should have done that earlier for both days. Yeah, the Euro would have Tuesday actually being the main day with that ejection. Holy moly. That would be pretty insane for chasers over kind of Oklahoma, Texas. This is Monday what the euro has. Yeah, Monday would. Oh yeah, you'd have that secondary wave that's gonna push in and make the main show the next day. Holy, look at that. But basically, looking at the 500 millibar chart for Monday, I would think Nebraska into Kansas is going to be the main threat area, right? Generally in here, maybe a little bit further to the east, as that low or as that kind of swings in there and ejects that trough. 850 millibars would see if it agrees with me. Yeah, 850 agrees with me a lot. Generally on Nebraska and Kansas. The next day would probably be, let's see here. Yeah, the next day would be Kansas, definitely Kansas, and into Oklahoma as well. Probably would go early, and that's a nice bowling ball low. That'd be a really big time setup there. Big time upper level trough right here. You're just gonna have to hope that if you're a chaser that this doesn't go Maradona, so it doesn't go linear on you. But that's a really zonal, intense trough that the Euro has for Tuesday. We'll check ensembles in a second after this. Wednesday, that trough transitions into areas further in the mid south. Probably wouldn't chase Wednesday, personally. Maybe Illinois, I would chase it. Yeah, it doesn't look great. After that, you start to reload, I believe. Yep, you start to reload, you get that return flow. Also kind of just sweeps the Gulf in general. Ooh, don't know if I like that solution. Yeah, the Euro kind of sweeps the Gulf a little bit. So you'd maybe be relying on high plains, upslope flow there to get you back in the game. Looking at the 6Z EPS here, we'll kind of look at that. Here's for Saturday. We'll look at the ingredient that kind of combines everything. So for Saturday, EPS is generally bullseyeing from Central Texas over kind of a really just like an Among Us shape risk from Central Texas up into Central Oklahoma down through like Arkansas, and here has the greatest threat for severe storms. Or not Sunday, Saturday. Sunday, same general deal from Central Texas up into Kansas and Oklahoma down through the Mississippi Valley along the warm front. And then for Monday, it has Nebraska up, northern Texas up through Nebraska being the highlighted area. And we're going to look at 500 now and kind of look at some stuff here. So 500 millibar, you can see a pretty powerful shortwave. You do have a signal for another trough behind it. We'll have to watch that, but generally Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma in here would be the play. Let's see for the day previous. Looks like you're going to be really relying on the subtropical jet to influence you across Oklahoma and Texas to get you those storms to fire for that day as well. Let's see, there's a couple people watching. If you guys have questions, let me know. If not, we might be done here. We can look at the GFS ensemble. Let's see, high falls. Let's look at these. Ooh, yeah, Sunday doesn't have very strong high falls, so that might be a concern. Monday does, though. Yeah, Monday has pretty strong high falls. I think Sunday's going to be a conditionally intense day along the dry line in Oklahoma, which we've already seen so many times this year in the past couple of years, and it probably doesn't do much. But Monday and potentially Tuesday, if the Euro was right, would be days to really watch over the Southern Plains as kind of rebound days. And then after really Tuesday, the pattern is after really Tuesday / Wednesday, the pattern is really uncertain. Not yet. Sunday, I believe I didn't look at it yet. Sunday, it has a really strong low over Colorado. It fires storms from DFW up to like Kansas border. Let's see what it has for Monday. It's probably pretty aggressive, isn't it? Yeah, for Monday it has. For Monday, the GFS would be like a southern Kansas type of day, which I'd be down for. Oh boy, yeah, that's a lot of upper level wind shear there, or a lot of low level wind shear. Monday, look at the trough here over kind of Kansas, Nebraska, generally area. Kind of shears it out. That's not really a great look. Oh, because it has the main one behind it. Okay. Tuesday could be pretty intense wherever that ends up going. Right now, the GFS thinks Tuesday is going to be further east, over like Iowa and Missouri. The Euro has it being further to the west. That'd be a pretty big day there. And then Wednesday, after we start to see that front kind of crash. Thursday, we start to see that return flow in the GFS a little bit earlier than the Euro. You start to see that return flow already setting up. Probably a break day for chasers, and then like Friday, Saturday toward the weekend is when you're going to start seeing those risks again. Yeah, got some deeper moisture that kind of works your way in there. That's solid. And this is probably my last day of the trip. Ooh, that'd be like a Texas risk. Generally setting up right in here. And just travel home from there, rip into home. No worries. Okay. I think that'll do it though. I'll wait like a couple minutes if people have questions. If not, thank you for tuning in. If you did tune in, let me know how you liked it, and we'll see you next time. If nobody wants to, if nobody has any more questions. I'll wait a couple minutes for that. To kind of for people to kind of move in here, see if they have questions, and then we can end it here. Hold up, there we go. All right. If you have questions, let me know. You can go to my Twitter page and ask me there if you have questions. Or join my Discord server.